Yemeni Student Association. Any Yemenis in the crowd? Hey, okay, for sure. So I started the Yemeni Student Association at UC Berkeley. Unfortunately, I'm leaving after this announcement, but I really wanted to talk to the folks in here. But basically, the Yemeni Student Association, we do mentorship and tutoring, and then we try to foster Yemeni community at Cal. And then the last thing is like humanitarian efforts, right? So we work with the high school students, we host events, and then we have this initiative called the Light Up Initiative, Light Up Yemen. There was this another initiative called Project Feed Yemen, and all those you can find them on Google. But I really wanted to know some of other Yemeni organizations in the area and your respective schools. So please find us on Facebook, Yemeni Student Associations at Berkeley. Hit us up, let's connect.
I just hope that
enjoy the conference. Before I take off, I want to appreciate 3 different folks, and I do recommend y'all to like do this in your like MSA board or whatever board you're in to end your meetings of appreciations. The 3 different groups I want to appreciate. This first the MSA West organizers. Let's give them a clap of hands. The second group of folks I want to appreciate all the interpreters right here in the front. And then the last group of folks I want to appreciate are the folks that we usually never acknowledge, the custodians that clean after us, security monitors like Miles over there, so please show up for some love. And that's it, Assalamu alaikum.
Is it on now? You guys hear me? You guys hear me in the back? Yes. Is it up? Okay. Let's get started. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the last and final main session for the MSA West 19th Annual Conference. This next session will have 2 sisters as the main speakers. 2 really wonderful and amazing sisters. And inshallah, I think that they'll really be able to take the goal and purpose of this conference home for us. So, right? Okay, they're coming out, but before I let them speak, I'll do a quick introduction of the 2 of them and just talk to you about what this talk is about. And inshallah, after that, we can end off with a little bit of announcements, closing remarks, etc. I don't know which sister to introduce first. That's like, how does that work? Okay. So that, I'll introduce Sister Dalia Mogahed. A little bit about her. Dalia Mogahed is an American scholar of Egyptian origin. She received her undergraduate degree in chemical engineering with a minor in Arabic from the University of Wisconsin. She subsequently received her MBA from the Joseph M. Katz Graduate School of Business at the University of Pittsburgh. She is the Director of Research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding in Washington, D.C. She is also President and CEO of Mogahed Consulting, a Washington, D.C. based executive coaching and consulting firm specializing in Muslim societies and the Middle East. Mogahed is former executive director of the Gallup Center for Muslim Studies, a non-partisan research center that provided data and analysis to reflect the views of Muslims all over the world. She was selected as an advisor by U.S. President Barack Obama on the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnership. So that's one of and a little bit about Ustadha Yasmin Mogahed. Got it, okay, come to that. Yasmin Mogahed received her BS degree in psychology and her master's in journalism and mass communications from the University of Wisconsin, Madison. After completing her graduate work, she taught Islamic studies and served as a youth coordinator. She also worked as a writing instructor at Cardinal strict, who I butcher that, University and is staff columnist for the Islam section of In Focus News. Currently, she's an instructor for Al-Maghrib Institute, a writer for the Huffington Post, an international speaker and author, where she focuses most of her work on spiritual and personal development. Yasmin recently released her new book, Reclaim Your Heart, which is now available worldwide. And just a quick announcement. Can you guys hear me in the back? Are we good? And after the session, Sister Yasmin will be outside on a table with her books, so you guys definitely check that out on your guys' way out. And I think you guys, the topic is on the programming booklet, and without further ado, can we please give a round of applause for our speakers?
Raise your hand if you can hear me. Okay, alhamdulillah. We were having some acoustics issues before, so alhamdulillah, it's working now. So the topic is moving forward, and in the current political climate, in the current social and even spiritual climate, I want to offer 3 themes for our path forward: courage, compassion, and connectedness. Because, brothers and sisters, this is a time first for courage. It's not easy. It never has been easy, but now it's not easy to be a Muslim in our country. This is a fact. This is not overreacting. This is not being melodramatic. It's just recognizing reality as it is. So it will take courage. It will take courage to stand up, to be unapologetically Muslim, to stand up for justice, to stand up for what's right. And I've been reflecting on this question of where does courage come from? And I want to share with you a reflection about this question from a story from the Quran that I think really speaks to our situation today. And it's the story of Bani Israel, who had gathered a very ragtag, undisciplined, very poorly trained brigade to go fight a giant called Goliath, who had amassed a huge army. And they were led by Talut, Saul, in the Bible. And as they were marching to meet this giant and his huge army, a small group who really didn't have a lot of battle experience, didn't have great training, weren't really well armed, Talut said to them, you are going to be tried, you are going to be tested with a river. Now, I was just listening to Naaman Ali Khan actually give a tafsir of this ayah, and what he said was that the language actually of the ayah implies that they had been walking for days, that they were far away from any village, and so they hadn't been well supplied with food and drink for a long time. And now there was going to be this river, and they were told not to drink from the river. In fact, they were told not to even taste the water, and that anyone who drank their fill from this river was going to be dismissed from the army. He says, is no longer with me, is not of me. And so that was their first test, a test of self-discipline, a test of self-restraint. And it says in the Quran that most of them drank their fill from this water. And so the first line, the first sort of test or filter was, will you restrain yourself for the sake of God? And most of this group actually failed it. And so when they crossed the river, their numbers had shrunk even more, because the only ones left were the very few who had obeyed, who had either restrained themselves from drinking from the river or had only taken a handful of water, as he said was the exception. And so that was the first test, is do you follow the law? After that crossing of the river, the believers and Talut said, we feel overwhelmed. How we are weak against Goliath. And yet a small group, among the small group that was now left, said, how often has a small group dominated a large group with the permission of God? And God is indeed with as-sabirun. And God is indeed with those who show sabr. And I really want to look at this because it tells us where courage comes from. First, I want to be clear. The group who is now either saying they feel overwhelmed and they feel powerless against a giant, and those who say that they have hope, both of them are believers. Both of them passed the first test of self-restraint. So we're not talking about hypocrites. We're not talking about kuffar. We are talking about two groups of believers. But the second group that said, how often has a small group dominated a large group? There was one more thing that the Quran said about them. There was one more descriptor. And it was those who were certain of their meeting with Allah said, how often has a small group dominated a large group? And indeed, God is with the patient. Because this small group, this second group that had that courage to go forth, even in their small numbers, and face the giant who had been amassing an army, because as they were marching, they actually started to see the army gathering in the horizon. And they were already an ill-equipped group to begin with. But they had lost many of their people, most of their members, because they failed the first test. So now they were a tiny, tiny group of ill-equipped, untrained, and fragmented believers. Does any of this sound familiar at all? And this was the context, but where did they find their courage? They found their courage because when they looked out to the horizon, and when they saw these armies gathered in the horizon, their frame, their mental and emotional frame of reference was not just that physical horizon. Their focus was the fact that they would meet Allah. Allah was a part, dominated that emotional focus, that emotional and spiritual frame of reference. And so those armies and that giant were dwarfed. And so they found courage, not because they believed in themselves, but because they knew that Allah was with the patient. And I want to really stress on this point. Where does courage come from? Courage comes from including Allah in your mental frame. When you are thinking about the challenges before you. You see, the first group that crossed the river, they were believers. But their focus was on the smallness of their number. They were already small and now they were tiny. And they looked around and they were like, how are we going to meet Goliath, a giant, and his huge army on our own? They made, they came to the rational conclusion that it was really, they were in a terrible situation. And that's what they said. They said, how are we going to do it? It's impossible. But the second group's distinguishing feature was that Allah and meeting Him was what was dominant in their mind, not the meeting with Goliath and his army. And then the second part, we know, and Allah is indeed with as-sabirun. Sabr is always translated as patience. Patience. And sometimes patience to us means waiting passively for something to end. That's not what sabr means. Sabr is much better translated as perseverance, moving forward. The Prophet ﷺ single time of his life. And in every single stage of his life, he was striving, he was persevering, he was working, he was moving forward, trying different things, engaging different people, trying to find an opening for the hardship. He didn't just sit and wait for it to go away, and yet he was constantly practicing something. So in other words, what they were saying is our focus is meeting with our Lord, and we know that He is with those who persevere, who work but do not rely on their efforts, who know that it is on them to obey and on Allah to bring about the outcome. And that, brothers and sisters, is where courage comes from. You know, it's so interesting because this ayah actually is from, even though it discusses an issue of jihad, right? It discusses an issue of Goliath and David and this whole story of Bani Israel, but it's actually it's a ayah that was revealed in Mecca. And it actually came a short time before the Battle of Badr. And it came to present to the believers the correct mindset for what they were about to come up against. A small group overcoming a large group with the permission of God. And God is indeed with those with sabr, those who persevere, push forward even when it's difficult. So where does courage come from, brothers and sisters? It's with this dual knowledge. Allah should be in our frame when we look out on the horizon and see the masses and overwhelming armies, it seems like, of powers that seem to be against us. With that horizon, with that mental frame, we have to include the maker of all means. And when we do, those things are dwarfed, and we feel empowered. We feel like we can do it, not because we believe in how wonderful and powerful we are, but because we know that it is not up to us. Alhamdulillah. It's only on us to work. Reliance means not that you don't work. Reliance on Allah means not that you don't work. It means that you don't worry. And second, brothers and sisters, this is a time for compassion. It's a time for courage and it's a time for compassion. And compassion grows out of courage. And here's what I mean. So many times communities and individuals, when they feel attacked, when they feel that they are going through a time of hardship, they fall into one of two categories, both of which are actually two sides of the same coin. They either see society around them as their enemies, someone to conquer, someone to, subjugate and attack, or they see the people around them as someone to win the approval of, someone to appease and overly accommodate and seek acceptance from. And in fact, both of those reactions come from a place of insecurity, come from a place of fear, come from a place of looking to other people as as either validators or as either overlords to appease or enemies to conquer. But the Prophet ﷺ never did that. If you study the way he engaged with his enemies and his friends alike, in the times of the greatest persecution that the community witnessed, he always came from a place of compassion. He went to his enemies not to conquer them, not to seek their approval, not to seek their acceptance, but because he had something to give them. He went to them from a place of generosity, not from a place of need. You see the difference? Sometimes we were like, well, I don't need you, I don't need your approval, so I'm going to basically degrade you. That's the opposite of what a Muslim does. We are neither in need of people's acceptance, nor do we look to people as inferior to us. Both are extremes, and both are against what our tradition teaches. Our tradition is rooted in generosity and compassion. The Prophet ﷺ was described by Allah. He could have described him in so many ways, but the way that he chose to enshrine his description in the Quran is as a rahmah to all the worlds. And if we claim for him to be our example, then we have to be walking, talking examples of rahmah, and to approach people from a place of generosity. Because the evils and the climate and the threats that threaten us actually threaten everyone. And as we forge a spiritual and moral revolution and lead this transformation that has to happen in our communities and in our country, we should do it from a place of generosity. We are doing this as the Prophet did because he had something to give. And then the third thing, brothers and sisters, is it's a time of connectedness. It's a time where we can no longer afford the kind of bickering and small-mindedness that we often see. It's a time of connectedness within the community and with other communities, other vulnerable communities in our country. Unfortunately, so much of our history in this country, and I'm going to specifically focus on those who came to this country one or two or three generations ago. So much of the focus of our community, those who came 2-3 generations ago, and that would be me, I'm included in that, is in being accepted into the dominant culture. That we thought, being an American meant basically being honorary white people. And we made the wrong choice in this assessment. We didn't understand that our natural place was in solidarity with the most vulnerable. And now we have no choice but to be in solidarity with the most vulnerable, because we are just as impacted as any of them. And so it is a time for connectedness. But it's very difficult for us to credibly connect with other communities when we don't have our own house in order, when we have not healed the fractured situation within our own communities, when we are suffering from intra-Muslim racism. This is something we have to heal from, brothers and sisters. This is something that should end with this generation, should have ended with my generation, but unfortunately, it's still something we are suffering from, and we have to deal with it. This is a time of deep, deep connectedness. Now, I want to just end with one thought for you. Unity means not conformity, not everyone being the same, not everyone thinking the same, but actually unity means the ability to disagree safely. It's the ability to disagree safely. It's the ability to love each other and have mutual respect even when we don't agree. And Allah created us to see things differently. The Sahaba didn't agree with each other. And yet, at the end, they were able to discuss and to disagree safely. So, to sum up, moving forward, what's next requires courage, it requires compassion, and it requires connectedness. Jazakallah khair.
السلام عليكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So So I was sitting listening to Dalia talk about agreeing to disagree safely, and I just thought I would give you an example of that. My sister and I, we agreed to disagree safely about how to pronounce our last name. So that's an example. So many people are like, Mogahed, is it Mogahed? It depends on the sister. How to move forward. So in talking about how to move forward, I want to give you guys an analogy. And that analogy is the analogy of a journey. Every single one of us in this room is on a journey. And no matter what you believe in, you're on a journey. Now I want to talk about what happens when you're on a journey and what do you need in order to be successful on that journey. To begin with, to be successful on a journey, you have to know where you're going. You have to be able to see the road and understand the road. Now one of the things a lot of people don't realize is this. We don't actually really see with our eyes. We don't actually see with our eyes. We see with our hearts. And what do I mean by that? I mean that in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that there are people who are blind, but it is not their eyes that become blind, it is the hearts inside their chest. And so the first step to being successful on this journey is we have to make sure that we have sight. And when I say sight, I don't mean that you have 20/20 vision. I mean that you have a heart that sees. And this kind of sight in Arabic is called basira. Basira, the inner basira, is in other words, insight. It's the ability to see black as black and white as white, up as up and down as down, and to not have things turned upside down. See, we live in a world right now of confusion. We are confused. We don't know which way to go. We don't know who to listen to. Well, which website, but which group, but which opinion. We feel confused. And that confusion is actually a symptom of the fact that our hearts need work. Because you see, if you think about any kind of lens, right? If you put on glasses, and your glasses are dirty. So suppose you have like a layer of dirt that thick on your lenses, what are you going to be able to see? Anyone? Nothing, right? And until you clean those lenses, you're not going to be able to see anything but darkness because your lens is dirty. And it's the same thing with the heart. The reason why we are confused is because we have to do internal work. And that's the reality. We have to clean the lens so that we can start to see things more clearly. We will be able to see things for what they are. Because right now, we are in a time of confusion. We are in a time of confusion. What's happened is, something that is very ugly is being beautified. And something that is very beautiful has been vilified. So this is actually a widespread problem right now. See, Shaitan doesn't come and say, actually salah is beautiful, but leave it. He doesn't come and say hijab is beautiful and liberating and empowering, but you know what, take it off. That's not how he works. Instead, he'll come and say, actually, salah's a burden. Or actually, hijab is, it's taking away from your personality. Or it's going to get you into trouble. Or it's oppressing you. So what he does is he actually changes the way we see things. So once you change your lens, then your actions are going to act accordingly. The first step is that you have to clean the lens, so that we can actually see the reality of things. This is the haqiqah, the actual reality, the actual truth, capital T. The actual reality of things we'll only be able to see if you clean the lens. And cleaning the lens means taking care of the heart, because the heart is the lens. Make sense? So the first thing we have to do to be successful in a journey is work on cleaning the lens so that we can actually understand things as they really are. And when things come at us, we're able to distinguish between them. We ask every single day, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, at least 17 times a day. We're asking Allah to guide us to the straight path, because that's something that no matter what teachers you have, no matter what school you go to, no matter what shaykh you're sitting with, if you don't have a clean lens, all the light in the world will make no difference to you. Because you see, if you're blindfolded, you could be in front of blinding light, but you can't see any of it. You can't see it until you take off the blindfold. So we have to prepare our hearts to be able to receive light and to be able to see things as they really are. And that's a whole process of internal purification. And that's something that is actually within our deen. We have the prescription within our deen. You don't have to go to a desert out with a guru to learn that. That's already within our sharia. Within our deen is the tools, the spiritual tools to clean that lens, to clean and purify and strengthen the heart. So that's number one. Number two, there's two ways when you're driving in a car to not be able to continue a journey. There's two things that can happen. The first thing that can happen is that you run out of fuel, right? If you run out of gas, you're not going to be able to keep going. And that's one of the biggest problems that happens to us, especially as activists, especially as even Islamic workers, is that we run out of fuel. This is called burnout. When you're working, and then you just run out. You just run out. You run out of motivation, you run out of fuel. So what I want to advise you and myself is that we have to continuously be refueling. And to refuel, this is also spiritual work. This is something that we have to do between us and God. We have to have personal time between us and Allah in order to refuel. Because this journey isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. It's not something that's going to be short. This is a long haul, this is a long journey, and it's going to require endurance. It's going to require, as Dalia said, perseverance. Not just sitting around passively, but actively being able to withstand the journey. That's what a marathon is. And so we have to continuously be refueling. The reason why people burn out is because they don't have that source of refuel, internal refueling, internal or spiritual refueling. The second way that a person can get off the path, or somehow the journey doesn't continue, is if your car crashes. If you get into a crash or a collision of some sort. And now this happens sometimes to us in our journey when a calamity hits us. Whether that calamity is political, or that calamity is emotional, or that calamity is personal, not being able to handle the calamity can sometimes derail us. And so these crashes that happen in our lives, if we don't have the mechanism, if we don't have the tools to cope with these crashes, that will also get us off that journey, and we cannot reach our destination. And so being able to withstand the weather, that's also a very, very important aspect in being successful in this journey. We have to be a people of endurance, and we have to be a people of, as Dalia said, courage. We have to be strong. We have to have firm roots. And I like to use this story because it kind of emphasizes or illustrates this point. You guys all remember the story of the three little pigs? Yeah? Okay. So I'll remind you. So you have these three little pigs. One of them was really lazy. And so this little lazy pig built his house out of something like straw or something, right? Something very weak. Why? Because he was lazy, he didn't want to put in the work. And then you have another pig who was a little less lazy, but also lazy, and also makes his house, but out of something like twigs. And then you have the third pig. And the third pig put in the work to have a strong foundation, and he made his house out of brick. So then what happens is the big bad wolf comes around and does what big bad wolves do, which is what? Puff and blow the house down. Okay? You guys need to get up to date on your fairy tales. Everyone's just like, that was so 1980. I don't know. Anyway, and so he puffs and he blows the house down. Well, see, this is the thing. In life, we have lots of big bad wolves. Yeah, some of them are orange and they wear toupees. Some of them, but the thing is, when a wolf puffs and puffs, we shouldn't be surprised. That's what they do. That's what they're actually made to do. But our job is what? We need to have a solid foundation. And so these pigs, what happens when the big bad wolf comes around and does what big bad wolves does? He huffs and he puffs, and what happens with the first house? It gets blown down, and he blows the house down. Why? Because it had no foundation. The person, that pig didn't put in the work to have a solid foundation. And so the first trial that came around destroyed it. It destroyed the house. And so that pig is destroyed. Then you get the next one, the same thing happened. But you see with the third, he had a strong foundation. He put in the work to have a strong house made of brick. And when that house was now encountered the huffing and puffing of the big bad wolf, it didn't get blown down. Why? Because the foundation was strong. See, as believers and as a community, both individually and as a collective, we cannot be weak. We cannot have straw houses. We need to have brick houses. We need to be like that solid tree, like that tree that Allah talks about in Surah Ibrahim. Its foundation is firm. It's deeply rooted. And one thing you'll know about trees, or I'll know about trees, is that the taller a tree gets, the more deeply it has to have its roots, and the more wide. And it's just the way it works. The tree cannot get higher into the sky and cannot get bigger unless it has a stronger, deeper foundation and roots. We're the same. As a community and individually, we have to be a people who can withstand weather. Weather's always going to happen. As you saw, right? We got lots of weather in this place, even though we're just used to sun. But weather happens. It rains. Storms happen. Earthquakes happen. We're told in the Quran, in a very powerful ayah, أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَنْ تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. Do you think that you will enter paradise without going through what those who went before you went through? مستهم البأساء والضراء وزلزلوا حتى يقول الرسول والذين آمنوا معه متى نصر الله. These people, it went through adversity and hardship, calamities. They were so shaken. They were so shaken that even the messengers and the people with the messengers are asking, when will the help of Allah come? Are we asking, when will the help of Allah come? Yeah, sort of. The messengers are asking this. The people with the messengers are asking this. Mata nasrullah. When will the help of Allah come? Allah tells us that this is going to happen. We have to be a people who can withstand this weather, that can withstand huffing and puffing. We can't just break the moment that we get some wind or we get some rain or we get some shaking. We have to be more firm than that. And then Allah ends this ayah by saying, أَلَا إِنَّ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ. Indeed, the help of Allah is near. Brothers and sisters, the help of Allah is near, but we have to be a people of endurance. We have to be a people of endurance. The next point I want to make is this. We also have to be a people, as Dalia said, of compassion and mercy. I was actually thinking maybe she read my notes. Just kidding, she didn't. I have proof. I talked about it at RIS. Compassion and mercy. There's nowhere to put the bottle here. It'll all spill. Compassion and mercy. We have to be a people who care about others. We cannot only just care about our community. We cannot only just care about us, my family, right? What's under my roof. Because the Prophet ﷺ said that if you see something wrong, you should try to change it. And he said you should try to change it with your mouth. You should speak out against it. If you cannot change it with your mouth, try to change it with your hand first, rather. And if you cannot, then with your mouth, with your tongue, speaking out against it. And then finally he said, if you cannot do any of this, then at least hate it in your heart. And that's the weakest of Iman. So we are supposed to be a people of struggle against oppression and against injustice. Islam is not a passive religion. It's not a turn the other cheek religion. It's not, just hush-hush, we just talk about praying and fasting and we don't talk about social injustice and other types of oppression. Actually, part of our Iman, as the Prophet teaches us, ﷺ, is taking action against injustice. The Prophet ﷺ said, help your brother if he is an oppressor or he's oppressed. And when the companion said, we know how to help him if he's oppressed, but how do we help him if he's the oppressor? And he said, by stopping him from oppressing. We have to, as part of our worship, work for social justice, work against oppression, whether that's happening within our own homes, or within our community, or it's happening overseas, or it's happening right here in this country. But see, that's part of our iman, and that's something that we often forget. That the Prophet ﷺ said this is the weakest of iman, to at least hate it. To at least see that there's something wrong, and it actually makes us, we feel it that it's wrong. It's not that we just are apathetic.
Woo!
Okay. Your time is up now.
Okay. It's really loud. The mic is so loud. Okay, I can literally hold it here.
Microphone's so loud.
Okay, guys. All right. Lastly, I'm going to end on this. We cannot be a people of despair. We have to be a people of hope. And I'm going to tell you guys a story that I find extremely inspiring, and a story we don't talk about enough. Even though we walk in the footsteps of this woman, anytime we complete one of the most important rites of our religion, we walk in her footsteps, but we don't talk about really the depth behind and the lesson behind her story. Hajjah was a woman who was stuck in the middle of a desert. And she's got a baby with her, and there's no one around. And now she's in a position where she is close to death. She's going to die, and her baby's going to die if she doesn't find water. So what does she do? She stands up, and she looks, Safa, right? And she doesn't find anything. What does she do? She runs. She runs to Marwa. Now, there's a couple points I want to pause and make here. First of all, Hajjah had reliance on God, didn't she? Yes? Now, her reliance on God, did it make her just sit down, lay down, wait for water to come from the sky? No. She was in a state of complete tawakkul, but yet she still ran. She still strived. And her running between Safa and Marwa is in fact called what? Sa'i. What does sa'i mean? To strive. Sa'i is striving. And every single one of us run in her footsteps. In fact, we barely can walk in her footsteps. She goes from Safa and then she goes to Marwa and she finds nothing. But see, at this point, she doesn't give up. And this is a lesson for us. Sometimes we're not going to see results right away. Sometimes we're going to work hard, either politically, personally, whatever, and we're not going to see results. And it's at that point that we're faced with a choice. We can give up or we can keep going. But the question I have for you is, which one did she do? She kept going. And it's amazing to me that she kept going even though she was repeating the same action over and over and over. And that is a lesson for us as well, that results don't come from just doing something once. Has anyone ever said, I did a sit-up, and it didn't work, and then you give up? Or I did a push-up, right? It's not going to work. You can't do a push-up or a sit-up and it's going to work. Allah has created the universe such that you need repetition. You need to actually do the same action over and over and over before you see any result. And it's the same thing politically, it's the same thing spiritually, it's the same thing emotionally, psychologically, whatever. We have to be a people who don't give up that easy. She didn't give up. She didn't give up, and she never lost hope. She continued to go between Safa and Marwa. And what's amazing is she didn't do it just once, she didn't do it twice, she didn't do it even just 5 times, 7 times. That's called perseverance. That is called hope. And that's a woman who we follow in her footsteps. You're not always going to see results overnight. But we have to learn that change takes time, development, transformation takes time, and growth takes time. If you look at a forest, we have the redwoods here, right? Somewhere in this state, yeah? They didn't grow overnight. We didn't get the tallest trees in the world overnight. It takes time. A forest doesn't grow overnight. A baby doesn't develop in a month. It takes 9 months. And so the reality is, we may not see the results we want today. We may not be seeing it even in the next 10, 20 years. But we have to continue to be a people of hope and realize that it's Allah that brings about change. I don't bring change. I don't bring results. Every single one of us know that you can walk and run in the middle of the desert all you want. It doesn't make water come from the sand. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that saved her. But He only saved her after she continued to persevere, continued to have hope, and continued the same action over and over and over. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make all our matters easy. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to ease the suffering of all those who suffer and to give us success in this life and the next. Inshallah, I want to thank all the organizers. I only got a chance to come just today, but may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you. Even those who are not up on this stage, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees your efforts and everything that you're doing, and we definitely appreciate it. There's no way that we could do what we're doing if they didn't do what they did. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you. I also want to make a quick announcement. One of the things I know, a lot of the people in this audience are at an age, and subhanAllah, the reason I want to make this announcement is because I found that within our community there's a crisis happening, and I'd like to call it the marriage crisis. And when I see, I told you, when I say the marriage crisis, I mean